Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Hail Yes, a Detroit Free Press podcast about University of Michigan athletics. I'm Tony Garcia, Michigan football and basketball writer for The Free, joined as always by my colleagues and friends, Reiner Sabin, our Big Ten insider, and Andrew Burkle, our editor and producer. Hoops coming off a couple nice wins, one against TCU last Friday, the other Miami, Ohio on Monday. We are recording this Wednesday afternoon, November 20th. They are back in action tomorrow night, Thursday, in a big matchup against Tarleton State before they hit the road for tournament week, Thanksgiving. They'll be in the Fort Myers tip-off. However, none of that is what we will be talking about on this show, where we instead turn our focus to the closing stretch on football. Did I get you there, Reiner? You think I was going to pull the switcheroo right before the show? We go over one thing and then I throw you into another?
No, I was on board. Yeah, I followed it. Right. I have eye discipline.
Very good. That's actually a better question. What position would you be? Would you be a defensive back with your eye discipline? Is that where you would play?
Maybe. I don't know. I haven't really thought much about what football position I would play. Maybe
kicker.
Maybe, yeah.
Hunter.
I don't know if I would be in a position. I'd be analyst. Yeah, that's probably what I would do.
Knowing your role. That's good. That's a good skill to have. Andrew.
I'd like to think tight end maybe, because I've always had pretty good hands, got the size for it, but realistically probably like holder or something like that. So
don't sell yourself short. I was going to put you at tight end. I was going to say I had a position for you, and you're a good tweener.
There we go.
You don't have. I mean, it's not like you're like really big for like a D1 tight end. But
no,
like you got good size. Every time I play, when we played golf together, I stand next to you. I always forget because we do so much remote work now. I'm always like, man, Andrew's like this. He's a big dude. You always like your presence is so kind. You don't strike me as like someone who's like, what are you, 6'3"s?
I'm like 6'2".
Okay, it's a tall 6'2". It's a
6'2", but broad
6'2".
shoulders. Broad shoulders, right?
There we go. All right. Now that we've broken down Andrew's measurements and talked about what we're not doing in hoops, we want to set the stage for what we are going to do, which is the Michigan football big picture. We were talking before we spoke with coaches today, Wednesday, in Schembeckler Hall. Reiner and I were, and just looking at some of the numbers. And in a lot of ways, the readership, I mean, understandably so, not quite what it once was during a national championship run. And so we're trying to figure out what are people thinking about right now, the future. Next week, we'll get to Ohio State, but we didn't feel we needed to break down the Northwestern game in any real depth other than when we do the picks later, because that's just really what we need. That's what people care about right now. What people have been asking us about, or at least me, and I think Reiner can say the same, is just sort of what happened here, right? How did things get to this point? Where are things going? We've gone over worryometer, worry meter, whatever we call it, and all those things. And so we just wanted to go back and compile a list of the things that were said and people were led to believe before the season and how this season has actually come to pass. And then assessing what that really means, right? How obviously 5-5 is not good, but how not good is this? In what ways is this not good? And we'll kind of break it down through the lens of the things we've heard and what we then tried to relay versus what's happened. Does that table seem set, Reiner and Andrew? Because I know we did want to, I don't always do a great job setting the table. We like to have a lot of fun and we just kind of dive in and talk a lot of ball. This one felt like I needed a placemat, needed some silverware, some cutlery, a nice dish, and to be set.
I think we're ready to be fed, first of all. Secondly, I think the point is that you guys are there all the time listening to them. And I think there's a frustration from the people who have been there, especially about what has been relayed to you guys, which then is your job to relay to the listeners and to the readers and to the viewers, or on and on. But the people who are on Twitter, that, your job is to relay that information to them. And it feels like consistently there's been a misrepresentation going on. Stop me if I'm wrong here. And you guys want to get down to what is really the issue behind that, because it feels like it's not either there's something going on where they're misleading you or something where they just don't understand their own team. And you guys want to get to the bottom of that by going through this list, correct?
Yes. And the reason it matters to fans, or we believe it would matter to fans, right, is because our job is to provide transparency. The less access we have, the more we rely on what is told to us, right? And so, frankly, I feel quite badly about getting okey dokes and getting Charlie Brown to some extent and giving Michigan a lot of benefit of the doubt this offseason. I predicted they would go 10-2. 10-2, I said, which now feels preposterous. And I can see why that was ridiculous. But part of me was buying into, you take everything with a grain of salt, but it was hard to not give the benefit of the doubt when it's like, man, there is such a winning culture here. And then I'm just going to lead into one of these quotes, right? Maybe I'm going to lead into the big one, Reiner, and then I want you to go because you've got a lot of good thoughts about this. Then Sherrone Moore, it's before the season. The date, I believe, is August 13th. 13th? Okay. And it's a fall camp preview, and we're talking, and he's asked, what gives you faith that sort of this standard is going to be upheld and things are going to keep rolling? And not only did he say competition is at an all-time high, he said, and just watching our guys in practice, when you have the vision of the head coach and you stand behind and you see everything going on, you watch the quarterback, you watch the line, you watch the D-line, you watch the defense's eyes, you hear the communication that the defense does, and you hear the pads go, you're like, oh yeah, we're going to be good. You can feel it. You can sense it. And there's just we don't really care about what other people think. We're just ready to go. So when someone says that, and then this happens, there's clearly a disconnect. And we're trying to piece together that disconnect, because it's one thing, Reiner, for coaches to be perhaps disingenuous with the public, but it's another to be disingenuous with yourself, and neither of which seem acceptable, but are kind of here, feels like here we are.
Yeah, Tony, looking at what Sherrone said and what's materialized, obviously it's completely different. But again, I wrote about this soon after that actual press conference saying, that they were puffing out their chests, talking a big game, and potentially setting themselves up for failure. Because, this has been a pattern in the past when Michigan has oversold expectations and underdelivered. It happened right before the pandemic too, and all in a couple of the years predating that, where whether it was Jim Harbaugh or Don Brown or Josh Gaddis selling these false expectations or creating false expectations and then failing to deliver. So it's a pattern that Michigan has had at its worst times, and I think we're back to seeing it now, where either they're not seeing things clearly there, or they're trying to, pump up the team through the media, maybe try to inject confidence. But at the same time, again, it creates an idea when, the boy who cries wolf, where you start to not believe anything they say when you set such a narrative that is clearly false or just is something that you can't possibly, see in reality actually materializing. So, it is a problem, and certainly something that reduces the credibility of Sherrone Moore and the rest of his staff, I think.
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond just, I don't want to just pin this on Sherrone Moore, right? Clearly there was some sort of, or there seemed to be a general theme of the messaging of, like you said, confidence, and this is the messaging that we're going to maintain the standard, and the standard is the standard, and all of these things. However, I wonder how, and it doesn't matter, and I want to make it clear that it's not, the point is not about what they're saying to, it's not an individual thing about you or me and them not being honest to us. It's about, like you said, fans ever being able to believe that they can trust what the coaching staff says. And then the level of, do they even actually understand the depths to which there are issues? Because I'm not sure how, because we didn't get to watch every practice, right? We didn't get to watch any of them. But I find it very hard to believe that this iteration of this offense had any level of success at any time against this defense, with the quarterbacking switches, with the wide receivers that can't get separation, with just the general dominance of the defensive line. Some of that is a credit to Michigan's own team, but I just don't see any way. I couldn't imagine it, right? And then you have Kurt Campbell saying that they're going to be explosive as an offense. They remain the only, not just Power 4 team, FBS Division I football team in America without a 40-yard pass play. That doesn't mean 40 yards through the air like, oh yeah, we know they don't take deep shots. It means the ball has never left the quarterback's hand and anybody has gained 40 yards in 10 weeks. That's unbelievably mind-blowing. As mind-blowing as the stat up the road is in East Lansing, that it's been 20 years, for the first time in 20 years, they don't have a group doesn't have a sack in 6 weeks. This is that same level of just ineptitude. It's pretty striking. And how could you be saying that when you are the ones looking at the talent? I don't know how that can happen. Unless it's just, well, this is a team. We can either say, yeah, we know we're going to be bad, or we can just be like, yeah, we'll be good, and then hope they somehow are.
Yeah, I mean, I think they got enamored with certain guys. I mean, Ron Bellamy mentioned, Donovan Edwards, thinking of the explosive plays that he made at one point, and, Colston Loveland, obviously, what he could do. And, he referenced Tyler Morris, one flash during the Alabama Rose Bowl game, where he turned upfield and scored that touchdown late in the first half. And so they basically tried to extrapolate moments and things into like a broader sense, thinking that this was going to be repeatable consistently. And I don't think that they saw that clearly, obviously. And I referenced this again, going back to the spring game. I said one of the things that, to look out for in that maize and blue scrimmage, which is the only thing we get to see basically leading up to the actual first game of the season against Fresno State. The maize and blue team, both teams, to get combined, scored on only 4 of the 14 possessions. And I said that consistency is going to be the biggest thing that you're going to want to see, not necessarily just the explosive element. And I mean, clearly they can't do the explosive element, but they also can't do the consistency. And part of that goes back to this other quote that Sherrone Moore said about the offensive line. They're coming together great. And you could ask the defensive guys to give them a run for their money. And to know that as long as I'm here, we're going to be good up front. We're going to be violent. We're going to be physical, tough, relentless, all the things you want. Well, the offensive line is none of that. And they haven't been throughout the season. The pass protection has been inadequate. The push in the running game hasn't been consistent or good enough. And the choices that they made putting together this offensive line weren't good either. I mean, you had, Dom Gadis, starting at center. They eventually moved to Crippen. You had Evan Link there, and they, moved to Jeff Percy and so
Andrew Gentry
too. And so, yeah, it's been kind of a problem all along. And so the offensive line they haven't delivered on, and that is Sherrone Moore's specialty. He should have known that, shouldn't have sold expectations looking at what he had there. Clearly, some of those players hadn't developed to the point that they were ready to go up against these, top of the line Big Ten defensive fronts. So I think it falls on the coaches. Again, they misjudged everything, trying to extrapolate small little, aspects that were good and try to think that that was going to be some kind of thing that they can make into a trend.
Almost to a man, every single person across the program is being asked to do more. Everybody, right? Like everybody has leveled up in what needs to happen, whether it's Mason and KG in snaps, Colston in yards, a quarterback who's never started, running backs who need to touch that. I mean, maybe not Donovan Edwards. Maybe Donovan Edwards literally is the only player on the team with just about his exact same role and which he's doing a little bit better this year, actually, than a year ago. But just when you are asking so much, I mean, there was so much unproven to expect everybody to just take that step and then you have, and nobody is expecting Sherrone Moore to bag on his guys, right? We want, or well, I don't know about want, but I expect him to say positive things about his team. And I want him, or for whatever it's worth, for him to feel good about his team and all those things. But you also have to be honest. Gio El-Hadi has had a very average season, very pretty forgettable in the grand scheme of things. And he said he was one of the guys who stood out on the offensive line because of how he changed his body. He said the offensive line was 9 or 10 deep, quote. I mean, Evan Link was, respectfully to him, was a turnstile at right tackle for more than a month, and nobody could even push past him. Dom Gadis had never played hardly any high level of football on the offensive line. He'd been a defensive lineman. They moved him over, right? And then he takes Crippen's spot, who's been practicing at center for 3 years. That's not because those guys are just so raw and talented. They had to see the field. It was a mid-off across the board. And Michigan then espoused that as the highest the competition's ever been. Just because guys are competing with each other does not mean it's at a high level.
Oh, and then he also said, again,
The development.
yeah. And then August, we've got enough talent and we're going to develop them. That's what he said. And frankly, a few underclassmen have really kind of stood out. And part of the problem is because they have played a bunch of close games, but he kind of poo-pooed the schedule again in August. I remember asking him about that and, what its effect was going to be on the snap counts with the defense. And, basically said the stamina was going to be good, but it clearly isn't. I mean, again, these guys over the course of the season, have had to play far more snaps up front, and it's affecting how the performance level of the team. I mean, I think, all this stuff has a cumulative effect, and I don't know if they saw, again, everything before it played out. I mean, granted, Mason and KG said that they were going to have to play more snaps going into the season, knowing the depth behind them and also the schedule in front of them. But at the same time, I don't think that they totally thought of every little aspect and how it was going to affect the rest of the team, including this idea of developing players for the future. Again, few guys have stood out that are underclassmen. With the exception of Braden Hillman, maybe Mason Curtis, Jordan Marshall. Again, with some of the special teams contributions, but not enough players just make you feel good or excited necessarily about the future, or sure.
Yeah, no. And the idea that when you are desperate for receivers, right, that a Channing Goodwin, that an Amarion Stewart can't just crack the field right and give you a look, give you something. And they're supposed to say the farther away you are from the ball, the easier it is to see the field early, right? The closer you get to the line of scrimmage in the center, the harder it is. And so those are guys you would expect to maybe, just have a look. Number one, but also there's Mason Curtis, right? Who is a guy who has had a decent freshman year. I don't know that he's been, an all-America freshman or something, but every time his name comes up, Sherrone Moore calls him the tackling machine. A lot of people are saying that he's doing a lot of good things. He's been nice in games as well, but they had him playing wide receiver in the spring, right? They recruited him as an athlete. He's 6'4". They see they have a need for it. They see he has 8 interceptions or something as a senior in high school, and he's got ball skills, and so they try to move him over there. And that's all well and good, but why was nobody like that recruited at that spot in the first place? And if that's what you were thinking in the spring, then you never should have been selling some high-flying passing attack. If you're thinking that a true freshman who has never played wide receiver might be able to come in and help give you a spark, right? It's just a lot of these things didn't add up. And I want to spin it forward, Reiner, because the reason this matters is think of the decisions that need to be made this offseason. Not just the retention, but the portal acquisition. And the depth is turning out. All these elite, highest pieces that you knew you had, they're all gone. All of them gone. Mason gone. KG, Josiah, Will Johnson, Colston Loveland, all gone. Those are your 5 best players, full stop.
Probably Rod Moore, too. Again.
But he never got to play this year, so that doesn't factor in as a direct loss. But yes, no. The point remains. And then you can go past that, right? Even though he's not unbelievable, Makari Page is going to be gone. Derek Moore and Rayshawn Benny have big decisions to make. And you just think about that within the line. That's a lot. Wesley, the depth that they accumulated in the secondary, some of it is going to be gone, right? Quentin Johnson is gone. Wesley Walker's gone. Just on and on. And Amir Hall is gone, right? And that's just that side of the ball, not the side of the ball that has actually struggled. And so Reiner, it's looking like they might have to rebuild 2 units in the trenches, right? I mean, Miles Hinton is going to be gone. Josh Prevy's going to be gone. Sherrone Moore said it sounds like Andrew Gentry, who does have another year, is coming back. Crippen could come back. Then you got Link and you got a 5-star in Andrew Babalola. I want to hear your thoughts about this beyond just what I'm saying. But it looks to me like they're going to have to rebuild a whole lot of the interior of their line or interior of their team, the trenches, both sides of the ball. And anyone who's listened to this for a long time, and I know you feel the same way, that's where football starts and stops. You could talk about the quarterback. We could talk about the receivers and the playmakers. If you don't have that, you have nothing. And if you have that, then your foundation, your floor is so high. And just, I can keep going on, but please stop me. Look at all these decisions that have to be made and why we're asking about the things they're saying, the things they're analyzing, what they're telling us, the decisions they're making. How does it add up?
Yeah. I don't know. Again, the problem is with the transfer portal, they're not going to necessarily find replacement level players for the players that they are losing. So that's a big issue because some of the guys behind haven't been great, again, on the offensive line and defensive line. A couple of the edge rushers have been okay. Cam Brandt, Igawuna, and then Trey Pierce, have been okay. And Benny is by far the best if you hope he returns as far as the defensive tackle position is concerned. But yeah, they've got issues on the defensive line, especially because they're not going to necessarily find replacement level players they're not going to with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. I'll just come out and say it. That's just not happening. And then on the offensive line, again, I don't know if they've really truly developed that position. I think that's the problem when you have a 27-year-old offensive line coach. That's a tough position to coach, period. Again, veterans who spent their whole career doing this. Literally, look at Michigan State's offensive line coach and Sam Pittman before he became head coach at Arkansas. These guys spent years and years just focused on one group because that group is so technical. Ed Warner is a good example. He coached at Michigan and has been everywhere. Again, this is a very technical position. Put it in the hands of a very young rookie kind of position coach, and it's tough. And so, yeah, they're going to have a lot of decisions to make. I'm not necessarily confident, again, in this coaching staff because I don't think they see things clearly. The personnel decisions haven't been great. You look at the running back position and how they've handled that with Khalil Mullins and Edwards, and most recently the choice to kind of sideline Mullins and put in Ben Hall. Granted, I think they need to look to the future at the same token. I don't know why he was necessarily the one who had to pay for that. And then the other aspect is the quarterback position. They haven't handled that at all well. That evaluation process that led them to those 3 guys and led to the quarterback carousel that has played out or unfolded, it is alarming to me. And the choices they made on the offensive line, again, Dom Gadis initially and Evan Link, why? I don't know. And so it seemed like they had better options and they saw better options once they actually played. And it was pretty clear to everybody that, this guy should be probably starting in place of this guy. Yet it seemed to elude this coaching staff. So not a lot of confidence going forward in their evaluation ability. And I asked about talent evaluation going forward because, even just in the recruiting aspect, that's important. And, Jay Harbaugh was really good at that. He had a really good eye for talent. I found Hassan Haskins, Colston Loveland, it seemed like he was always kind of able to look to the fringes and find guys. I think he was in on Ronnie Bell too there. And so he's losing him and not having a guy necessarily who has that same eye, could be bad for Michigan going forward. They didn't really say, talking to the coaches, that there is a guy like that necessarily on staff.
There was no one guy.
Yeah, they say they do it collectively. But you kind of want to have one guy that's able to kind of be like, hey, that looks good.
But how do we know, again, and I'm not here to say be skeptical about everything, but when you're saying one thing and not doing another, it's hard to know even that much how to trust, right? Maybe Maybe there is a different answer. I don't know. I want to spin it very quickly before we break and then go on to our picks. The reason this is so important is because Michigan has the opportunity and the resources, the funding, the pedigree, everything you possibly need to flip this over in 1 year, right? I mean, you've seen this is no longer 15 years ago where coaches need multiple years to rebuild. They weren't going into a rebuild, number one. And number two, I said A1 and B2. Now, you can, as we all know, you can change things in less than a season, half a season, in a couple weeks. I mean, Indiana is everybody's favorite example of how you can go from the basement to the top like that. And so when you, and they did that at Indiana, right? You're not doing that with all the upside Michigan has to offer. And so it then comes back down to the staff. Can they make the right decisions? Can they evaluate the right talent? Can they say the right things to get people to buy in, right? Keep the buy-in, to get people to whether that's from other programs. And Ron Bellamy was talking about it today, right? What do you sell when the offense looks like this? What do you sell recruits? It's exactly what I was saying about Bryce Underwood last week. He really basically confirmed it. You say that you are the difference. We need you, right? And so they got to get that across. They got to get it to the finish line. And there's NIL involved. There's retention involved. There's the balance of high school versus portal involved. But it's a lot of big decisions, and they have all the infrastructure anybody could hope for to make them. But the early evidence of this coaching staff suggests that there's reason for concern to think that they can make all the proper decisions.
Yeah, well, and I know that they sold buy-in week this week with the players and everything, but I do wonder the buy-in with the players that when the coaching staff has failed them several times. I mean, again, calling that crazy 4th and 5 play with putting Orgy in the game and then handing it to Samaje Morgan with a throwback pass. Can't get past that from my standpoint. And then the crazy challenges they made and the botched timeout situation. When those things accumulate and you start seeing bad decisions being made in game, and then you see the results fall by the wayside like they have. I mean, there's been such a substantial decline. You do wonder about the buy-in from the players themselves and trusting this coaching staff going forward. And, again, that mindset affects the younger players. And again, you have this option with the transfer portal where, again, you can nope out pretty quickly these days. And so that is a question with this coaching staff. I mean, how much credibility have they lost over the course of the year?
What I would say is I've been impressed with, from the signs I can tell, and this is still reading between the lines, they have kept the buy-in. And Exhibit A would be Ben Hall last night, Tuesday evening in Schembechler Hall, when he was talking, when we were speaking with him, and he was talking about how he wants to be a leader of the future. He said, I don't just want to be a running back of the future. I want to be a leader of the future. I want to turn this thing around. I want to be one of the guys. That doesn't happen by accident, right? There is a conversation somewhere that sparks that. And he has enough belief. I mean, he was here when they won a national championship last year, and he's here now. And he's saying he wants to stick around to continue to lead. That tells me there's not been some crazy fall off. There's not some poison in the locker room. I mean, that perhaps there's not great coaches or not great players or some combination of both. But he still has that belief that they can move forward. And if you keep that, there's enough everything at resources at Michigan, buy-in, resources, they can move, they can turn this thing around.
Also a lot on the line for him too, personally, right? I mean, he can finally, that running back room is looking wide opening for him between Mullings and Edwards leaving. So I think personally, it probably benefits him to stick around there to be the running back at Michigan, but they do play hard. I mean, that Indiana game, first and foremost, right? That they played hard down the wire in that game. And
even Oregon, if you remember our Sean Windsor, he wrote that column afterwards. We didn't know if that was the number one takeaway, but it was a takeaway. And then to repeat it against Indiana, these guys got a whole lot of nothing to play for. I mean, they are still playing hard. There's no doubt about that.
I agree. But again, when you start to see, though, I mean, again, at the end with the timeout, like, why is he wasting it? So, I mean, again, that's got to filter into the players. We're like, man, like, we're doing everything. We're giving our effort, but these guys aren't coming through for us necessarily, too. I do wonder about that because, I mean, I know if I were a player, I'd be questioning things. I mean, for sure. I mean, and I think that's the case here. I mean, why is this program where it's at a year after going 15-0 and winning a national championship? Why are we doing some of the things that we didn't do last year repeatedly over and over again, making the same mistakes? Why are the coaches playing this guy over this guy when it's clear that guy is better? And so those are the questions I would be having as a player in this locker room. And I wonder how it's, we're going to see, that play out, maybe in these last two games, if at all. And also beyond that with, how many players decide to say, we're going to explore our options. Because again, the one thing that Sherrone Moore did really well in the offseason was player retention. They didn't have a huge exodus after the championship because, again, people were willing to give him a chance. But they've seen what's happened this past year. Will they still want to give him a chance after this? Because, again, I think he's lost a lot of credibility over the course of the year.
As they say, time will tell. It's a huge month or two, really a couple weeks before early signing day in December for Michigan. Retention, high school, they got to get a quarterback, right? There's just so much to do. The lines, and we will see how it plays out. All right, time to take a break. And then on the other side, we get into the picks, and that is when we will preview Michigan and Northwestern. Don't go anywhere. This is Hail Yes. All right, welcome back. It is now time for the picks, and with that, we turn it over to Andrew.
All right, fellas, let's start with the look at Michigan versus Northwestern. We promised a preview of the game this weekend. Northwestern, after a promising first year under a new administration, it's been a pretty tough go of it. The Wolverines, 13.5-point favorites versus Northwestern in the senior night at the Big House. Tony, do you think Michigan gets it done against Northwestern? Do you think they cover the spread? What do you see happening? I know you did the scouting reports and everything, so give us the full rundown on the Wildcats. You're kind of a lotter.
Yeah. Yes. Not that we like to point that out. People don't like if you went to any other university, but no. But
Northwestern and Michigan aren't exactly rivals, and you got your master's degree from there. So if you're letting your emotions get in the way,
I don't think anybody cares there. Really.
You don't think? We're good? Okay, yeah. No.
Not in a master's degree.
No, yes. Master's degree from Northwestern. Yes. Proud Wildcat. But really it's one of those, you claim it when it's convenient, and this is not a convenient year to claim it at all. I mean, it's classic Northwestern, right? They try hard. A lot of try-hard guys. They can kind of run the ball. They can definitely stop the run. They have a pretty good defense, but eventually they just don't have enough talent, enough offense, and then they fall and lose by 17. That's kind of the way I see it playing out with Michigan in this one. I mean, Northwestern, it's ironic. Michigan would probably like Northwestern's best receiver, who is AJ Henning, who used to go to Michigan, won a couple of Big Ten championships here, and is now in Evanston. But, I mean, their quarterback, Jack Lausch, is okay. I don't know. He's not a pocket passer. He can do things a little off script, but not a lot that scares you. Kind of a middling run game. That would be putting it very politely. I mean, they are bottom 10, 20 in America in just about every offensive statistic. And Michigan has an elite defense. Well, not elite, maybe one elite. Maybe one elite. Sorry. Elite against pedestrian offenses. If you think about it, Reiner, for those who are listening to the audio version, Reiner gave me a little bit of an face, which is fair. But Michigan has faced a ton of really good offenses. It's fair to say that. Indiana, very good. Oregon, very good. USC at the time was pretty potent. And Texas, of course, right? And Washington, Illinois. I mean, these are teams that can put up points. Northwestern can't put up points. Northwestern scores 18 points a game. And Michigan just held an Indiana team that scores 46 a game to 20. I like them to win. And for the first time in some time, I like them to cover. I got it somewhere around Michigan 27-10.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not so sold on, Michigan being able to score enough against Northwestern either. So, granted Northwestern's offense is pretty putrid. I mean, I don't think anybody, but Michigan's offense isn't anything great either. So I just think this is going to be an old-fashioned rock fight. Maybe a lot of field goals, maybe Dominic Spada and such. So I don't think that Michigan covers. No, I mean, and I also wonder, what the environment's going to be like at Michigan Stadium. I think it could be probably one of the worst crowds since maybe 2017 or even before that, maybe going back to the Brady Hoke era. I think a lot of the students will be gone, going home for Thanksgiving a little bit early. So it's not an exciting matchup. It's, again, the most, I guess, has a reputation for being the most kind of underwhelming team or opponent in the Big Ten. Northwestern, I mean, just doesn't have a great connotation. And then you combine the fact that Michigan's having a really mediocre season, and I think you could see a very sparse crowd or a sparse crowd for Michigan Stadium for sure in this game. And so I don't know if, Michigan's going to be affected by that either, just the blah nature of this game.
Wait, do you think that one's going to be bad? Wait till you see the crowd in East Lansing for Michigan State versus Purdue on Friday night. 1-9 Purdue. How did that game get through the schedule? 1-9 Purdue on a Friday night in East Lansing in late November before Thanksgiving.
That's
a bad job by Howler for sure. Yeah, and and locally here in Lansing, people know about Silver Bells, a huge deal downtown. I mean, it's just disastrous scheduling for Michigan State. But I mean, is it even that big of a deal in the first place? It's Michigan State Purdue. But anyways,
What do you think the crowd's going to be there?
40,000.
Well, I was going to say what the number they officially release or the number of people in there in the second quarter.
The actual number of people.
The actual number will probably be 30s, high 30s, mid 30s, especially if it's bad weather. Which, of course, the weather's literally flipping tomorrow before so it's gonna be terrible. It's gonna be empty. I think it's gonna be really a sad game that we'll still cover here at the Free Press like it's the Super Bowl. So.
How about Michigan Stadium? How about the Big House?
Oh, I don't think it'll be as badly affected. That's kind of goes to what I was going to say. I think it's going to be still 80, 90, 85% full. Michigan students don't seem to travel as well or as much for Thanksgiving, probably because Ohio State game is built in for years. But, any Thanksgiving game in a lot of stadiums, especially Michigan State, empty. Michigan has these games. It doesn't seem to be affected in the same way. A lot of maybe older folks going to the game affects it less. And a lot of Michigan State's fans, a lot of the fans up there are like, hey, I'm coming to see my daughter who's at the game, lives at MSU, or I'm coming to see my kid who's there. And I think that's less the case. It's more of a family affair in Ann Arbor. So I think it'll be slightly less affected. I'm not willing to bet on it, and Michigan's a better team. And I think this game is kind of one last hurrah for Michigan and the Mason Grahams and the Kenneth Grants and Will Johnson hasn't played in months, but Colston Loveland, those guys get one last kind of push before, even if it's in the back of the head, Ohio State's a tough matchup next week. So I think they kind of lay it all out on senior night or, junior night if you're going to the NFL and take care of business against a Northwestern team that doesn't match up physically with Michigan, doesn't, even though Michigan has discipline and coaching issues, I don't think they're really there with them either on that level. So I'm going to go with the Wolverines to cover and win in this one. Let's go. Let's save Indiana, Ohio State for last. That's a fun one. Obviously, Ohio State in the schedule for Michigan next. But Tony, you got a question?
Before we go off of Michigan, I just want to add a little bit of Michigan breaking news into this pod. I don't know how much it'll play. People will probably know. But Belleville cornerback Elijah Dotson has flipped his commitment from Pitt to Michigan.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, didn't mean to derail.
We'll get something up on that soon, I'm sure. But yeah, good. Little Belleville, Michigan news. Maybe Connor Stallions was working the back channels after all, even though it didn't work for Bryce Underwood. But we'll save Ohio State, Indiana for last. Fun one, big spread, but huge game for the national stakes here. But let's go with Army and Notre Dame. Notre Dame already blasted Navy earlier this year, but do we think this Navy game is going to be any different, Renner? Or the Army game this time is going to be different than Navy? Excuse me.
Yeah, I was going to go with Army to kind of cover, but then I was just thinking, well, Notre Dame really did destroy Navy, and that didn't go nearly as expected. And I just don't know if Army can keep up with Notre Dame's offense. Notre Dame has been able to put up points. They haven't played a very difficult schedule at all. A lot of people have been kind of complaining about the fact that their schedule has been so poor. it's not really their fault. They didn't know that Florida State was going to be terrible. USC, in their last game, it's just not a great team either. I mean, barely, the 500 mark or whatever. And so it's part and parcel of their, kind of peculiar arrangement and with the ACC and, the way that their schedule is arranged. I mean, it's really, depends on the year in a lot of ways. So, but, they seem to have been able to rebound from the Northern Illinois game. Things have kind of come together for them. Again, I mentioned the offense has really been pretty strong. So I'm going to say they have enough firepower to be able to kind of just keep Army at bay and outlast them. I mean, the question is whether they can stop Army's Russian attack. They've got a kind of more sophisticated modern style of the options. So it'll be interesting to see how Notre Dame defends that.
Yeah, last week against Texas, Army and North Texas, there was like 4 possessions in the first half. I mean, it is just ball possession. We know what Army and Navy and Air Force all want to do. I mean, it's ball possession. It is keep away to shorten the game and just grind you into dust. But Notre Dame is a little too skilled, a little too talented to let that happen. And obviously got the Navy game in the back of your mind when we went Navy, and then I think they gave up something like 51 or 52. But yeah, Notre Dame's offense has been humming. Everybody just thinks of that horrific night in South Bend against the Huskies. But they've obviously won 8 straight since then. They definitely got to get some style points too, as you mentioned, with the record. So I too. Initially, I'm like, oh, Army? I'm like, but I mean, once it's over, I mean, they're kind of begging you to take Army. If it was at 13.5 on the other side of that 2-touchdown number, I'd be like, it's kind of counterintuitive, but I'd almost like Army more there. They'd be like, wow, they don't even need to give you 2 full touchdowns. But when they're trying to give you the hook, that tells me that it might go out past that.
Yep. Army Navy, or the Navy game and the Army comp, obviously easy one to make. And I made it at the start of the pick here. But Notre Dame is 7-2-1 against the spread this year. And you know why? They've been blowing people out. They beat Virginia 35-14, Florida State 52-3. The Navy game, like I mentioned, 51-14, 31-13, 49-7. The only close game they've had all year besides the loss was 31-24 against Louisville. So they've been blowing people out, especially over the last few weeks. And even if this game is close, they could easily step on the gas and win by 21-28 in the end, because their offense is looking pretty explosive. But man, that schedule ended up being pretty weak besides the win at Texas A&M. I don't think if they'd have won that game, I don't even think they're in the playoff conversation. But that was a really good win, obviously. But
I don't know about that.
Stanford, no. I mean, Louisville, they don't have a single good win outside of Texas A&M.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, yeah, if they didn't win that game against A&M, yeah, they probably wouldn't. I mean, if they didn't play the game against A&M and it was some other team, I still think that they would be in the playoff, discussion because they're Notre Dame. So
true. Hard to argue with that. Yeah.
They have Keshet and the fact that, they might host a game against an Alabama. Boy, that would be a ratings bonanza.
Oh my God, yeah.
That's partially why they would love to see Notre Dame get playoff.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be fun to see a SEC team come up to South Bend in December, right? I mean, is the biggest Notre Dame theater? That's cool.
All 4 matchups right now we're projected in the Midwest, right? One in Bloomington, one in South Bend, one in Columbus, and one in Penn State, which would just be wild.
Yeah, that's what
finally after 60 years, 70 years of bowls being in Florida and California and Texas only, where the Southern teams have an advantage. Finally, the Northern teams get one
rep for the Midwest.
One tip to the calf. So, all right, what was kind of a wild card for our third game here? Colorado.
We only get a smirk out of Reiner, the Northeast elite, the East Coast elite, and then an SEC school, just the worst. This guy.
A Southerner by transit. Yeah, he's got no Midwest blood in him at all.
No, I don't.
All right, we went with Colorado and Kansas for our third game. Colorado has been one of the most fun teams and one of those fun stories after getting just crushed by Nebraska early in the year. It looked like it was done. Maybe the Deion's experience is going to flame out here. Next thing you know, they're ripping off wins. Easy schedule, but they're only a 2.5-point favorite at Kansas, despite Kansas being 4-6 and Colorado being in the playoffs. So that struck a chord with us. Reiner, you think this finally comes crashing down on Deion and Shador and Travis Hunter?
I'm buying Colorado right now. They seem to put things together. Again, they could have folded against any of these teams that they played, really. I mean, but they didn't. I mean, they went on the road and beat Texas Tech. They took care of business against Utah. Granted, Utah is not, the Utah that we're familiar with this year. But, I think that there's something to this team. It seems like they've been able to rally around Deion, and just the idea that a lot of people don't like them, and the whole, persona, the program under Deion. And so I think there is something to that. And the fact that they've had success, I think only continues and helps to build that. While Kansas, again, has played much better in recent weeks and, had that big win over Iowa State, I just don't see that necessarily that they're going to have a huge home field advantage. Actually, they're not even playing at their home field. They've been going back and forth, I think, between the Sporting KC Stadium and Arrowhead. And so that I don't think is going to be any kind of big advantage anyway. I mean, Kansas home football games are just not a thing. It's not like you're going to, it's not the basketball program. So, I mean, what I'm saying here is that I think Colorado has a chance to really go in there and do what they've done recently, which is, again, be able to kind of take care of business and continue their momentum.
And I disagree with a lot of it, but not a lot of it, but some of it. It's true. They have rallied. I was down on Colorado, and 8-2 is certainly better than I thought they would be. And you say they've rallied around the hatred and all that, and that might be part of it. They rallied around that, to use a Deion Sanders phrase, that bull junk Hail Mary against Baylor. I mean that just took them into another stratosphere, right? And so, and then they've only lost one game since, right? But I look at their schedule. Who's their best winning? I mean, they beat North Dakota State, which is not a D1 program, but that's actually a tough program year in and year out. That week 1 impressed me as much as anything. I mean, UCF, Cincinnati, Texas Tech, Utah, these are like mid teams. These are not good teams. And then now Kansas, not anything great, 4-6, obviously, but you mentioned their big win over Iowa State. How about their big win over BYU? They just beat number 6 BYU in Provo last week.
Yeah,
and then the week before that, they lost to a good Kansas State team, rivalry game on the road by 2, right? Another one of their losses at West Virginia, tight, at Arizona State, tight, both by 4 points. They lost to UNLV, who's good, 1 possession. Illinois, good, 1 possession. I mean, they've been in everything, and they're peaking right now. They beat 2 ranked teams in a row. They got an overrated Colorado team coming to Arrowhead. Give me the Jayhawks. Rock chalk.
Yeah, the Big 12 is just very mediocre or bad, but I mean, like you said, Tony, the Utah win at BYU, or the Utah BYU game should have been a win for Utah most likely, but that game showed you how close all the teams in that conference kind of are. And that's why I am going with Kansas this week. I think it kind of is finally going to catch up to Colorado. And trust me, I've been on the bandwagon. I've mentioned a few times that, I placed an early season wager on Travis Hunter to win the Heisman, not a vote or anything, so don't worry about that. But though I've been following it obviously closely ever since, and they've just kind of been slowly building up momentum. The Baylor win was a miracle, and just kind of chugging along there. But this spread, it gets your attention, right? 2.5 points. Despite Colorado being in the playoff, Kansas 4-6. And I think that Kansas is playing good enough football that they're going to knock off Colorado. I think Kansas wins straight up. So I'm going to go with that pick there. And finally, last but not least, the game that,
What's that ticket at, Andrew? You don't have to tell me how much you put on it, but what plus what? What was that? Plus 30?
So I got him at 40-1.
Woo! Attaboy.
In week 3, I think, and now he's minus 350.
I was going to say he's a favorite now.
Yeah, but the high, obviously, I've been following it every week since like week 2 or 3, and these odds, I mean, they flip like, the weather in Michigan. I mean, Gentie's the favorite one day, then all of a sudden Travis Hunter plays but has like 50 yards, and he's the favorite, and then Gentie plays again, then this last week it seems to have flipped enough where Hunter's fully in command, and I think unbiasedly, I think he should be the Heisman winner. We've never seen anything like.
You are tampering with the jury right now.
Well, hey, I'm allowed to make a case just between two friends. I was listening to McShay's podcast, which, if you're listening to another college football podcast, it's pretty good stuff. He's been really getting into like the grind or like the tape and everything. So he had his buddy review Travis Hunter as just a cornerback and give him a grade. And he said he thinks he's a top 5 pick as a cornerback, Derek Stingley level, maybe a slightly below Will Johnson, but just because he's so good, he isn't that high as a corner. And they both agreed that he's a better prospect as a receiver. So, he's basically a top 5 pick at both positions. And it's just absurd. So we've never seen a player like him. I hope he gives it a try at both levels.
Go, hey, Ohtani.
Both directions. Yeah, why not? Try it. And if it doesn't work, then just put him at receiver. Put him at corner if it doesn't work.
The problem is he's so thin, right? Or slender, or whatever the polite way to saying it. There's not a lot of, he's built like me. And that's not a good thing if you're trying to play in the NFL.
Yep. And he's had a history of shoulder injuries, but man.
So that's the concern.
To have a player who's worth a top 5, is a top 5 pick at both positions, to be able to play him on both sides, even if he ends up being like a first round talent at both. That's an interesting conversation in and of itself, right? Is that more valuable than just a top 5 pick? I don't know. We could do a whole podcast on that, but we'll finish it off with Indiana at Ohio State. The Buckeyes are a 13.5 point favorite over undefeated Indiana, who's kind of become the talk of the college football world now between, are they overrated? Are they underrated? Should they be number 1? Should they be number 2? Should they probably not ahead of Oregon, but it's a very divisive topic this year. And this is, we'll finally settle it, right? Like, if Indiana gets beat by 45 points and Ohio State looks superior, well, we know what they are. But in the meantime, what do you guys predict will happen on Saturday?
Yeah, I'll take it first. I was expecting and ready earlier this week to pick Ohio State, especially after what I saw Michigan do to Indiana about 10 days ago in Bloomington. I was not in any way, shape, or form impressed. Early, for sure. It was kind of what I expected. But after they got up 17-3, they really had to hold on against a Michigan team that I have seen struggle to put away Michigan State. That's not good, right? That I've seen lose. That's their only win since September, right? This team has not been playing well. And yet this red hot Indiana team could barely do it. However, last night, Tuesday night, Ohio State center Seth McLaughlin tore his Achilles. He is out for the game. He is out for the year. And not only does that, I was thinking about that from the Michigan perspective for next week, which we'll get into. And now all of a sudden, let me tell you, that's more of a game than I thought it was going to be a few weeks ago. I now believe. However, for the same reason, I just think it's going to stunt Ohio State's defense or offense just a little bit. Indiana still has a really good defense. And I think this one might be a little tighter, a little more low scoring than I thought it would be originally. And just because of that, I think whether it's a backdoor, whether it's getting up early and then not holding on, there's a lot of pass for Indiana to keep it inside 2 touchdowns. And so I'm going to take the Hoosiers to cover. But I do think Ohio State wins the game. If we want to pick.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that injury is pretty concerning, especially considering Indiana has a really good defensive front. I do wonder because, how much McLaughlin has been involved in identifying the pass protection and kind of setting that up and making those calls for the line. And again, Indiana's guys, like especially the Kamara, can really create a lot of disruption, for Ohio State's offense. And so it does concern me. And so that's kind of where I stand there. I also think that, Indiana after halftime may have just kind of been in kind of this cruise control, feeling like they can just, ice the game against Michigan. And didn't do that. They're going to go in with guns blazing against Ohio State. Nothing is going to be off the table. And I just think, Kurt Cignetti has shown that he can get his guys going. And, these are veteran players and experienced players. And I don't think they're going to be, affected by the environment at the Horseshoe. So I think, again, Indiana's really going to play them tough. I think, like you said, probably Ohio State wins the game, but I like the Hoosiers, and I think that they're for real, and they should probably be in the playoff. I think it'll be an exciting element for college football to have a team like that kind of just storm into the college football playoff.
Isn't it kind of funny because the 14-point spread, or 13.5, maybe a point here or there, but doesn't that feel kind of like the cutoff for Indiana's respect level Like if they can go in there and win or, lose by 10 points, 13 even, you'd be like, hey, they gave them a game. I think they deserve to still be in there, maybe like around that 11 or 12 seed. And if they get beat by 17 or 24 or 31 or 35, real quickly, people are going to start talking about that schedule and talking about the SEC's 2 lost teams behind them, Ole Miss and Alabama and all those other teams that are surely going to pass them if they do, even if they do lose. But I think this is the kind of game that Ryan Day at Ohio State has proven that they win and win comfortably usually. I think back to 2021, that Michigan State team that went in there, that was kind of a lot of ways like this Indiana team, made up of transfers, kind of, piecing it all together and momentum building up over the year. They went into Ohio State and got just annihilated. I don't think that's going to happen, but especially this injury on the O-line. Ohio State's O-line is looking like the Lions' D-line right now. I mean, they already lost their left tackle. The guys they replaced their left tackle with were terrible, so they had to shuffle the offensive line around. And McLaughlin was kind of like that centerpiece, that whole line. So it's certainly a big issue, but teams will have it on tape for a week, and I think maybe they can duct tape it together enough for 1 week before Michigan maybe exposes it a little bit for the playoff. But in the meantime, I think Ohio State wins this game pretty comfortably, despite, Big Noon and all the excitement around that one for sure. But yeah, we'll see. And hopefully it's a fun week of college football before rivalry week and Michigan Ohio State the week after that.
All right. So Notre Dame was the only game we all had consensus on. Is that right? Very good. So then that means we'll only all be wrong on that one. And then we'll move the rest around. Andrew, you want to do our favorite part where you run everybody through everybody's record real quick before we say goodbye?
Did you update the records?
I think I did. I tried.
After week 11? Okay.
Yeah.
We all went
on the far right number. Far right.
Yep. So you went 3-1 again, 26-18 now overall. I went 2-2, so I'm 20-24, and Reiner went 2-2 as well, 21-23. So one game this week flips, and I'm back tied with Reiner. Tony's whispers, Tony's already basically won this, but we're not going to talk about it. So,
No, you can't count your chickens. Certainly not.
This is Tony's highlight of the week in his life.
We're having fun with the
rubbing in my face. Talk about the records.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. It's a normal thing to do at the beginning of the record recap, be like, all right, guys, not the best week last week, went this and that, or to do it. And then you didn't do it. And I felt like the first time you didn't do it was when I had a good week and you had a bad week. I was like, huh. And now it just kind of happens. So not the good week, bad week.
I know. But honestly, I just get so excited for the games that you always set me up with like a lead in to whatever the first game is. And then I just go right in the game, and then we forget about the picks, and there's really no need to go back if you haven't already
right. Right. Okay. And there's no need to go on. This episode is over. Thanks to everybody who makes that possible, like our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, our sports editor, Bill Bradley, and our audio engineer, Robin Chan. For Andrew, for Reiner, I'm Tony. Thank you for listening. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can read all the Michigan content, which will be aplenty. Hoops, football, recruiting, portal. It's busy, busy time. It's all on freep.com. And you can subscribe there as well and support our whole team. We appreciate it. Enjoy your day. This is Hail Yes.